Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Tasmanian Accessibility Community. Today's speaker is Dr. Lisa Stafford from Griffith University. Dr. Lisa Stafford is passionate about inclusive, sustainable communities and transport equity. With over 25 years of experience as a researcher, educator, and planner across government, non-government, and university sectors, Lisa continues to lead change at the intersection of disability participation, urban planning, and transport. Her work also champions inclusive, participatory co-creation methods and practice-led research to ensure the voices of all people are heard in research and public planning. Lisa also brings her own perspective as a chronically ill disabled woman. Lisa is an ARC Future Fellow with Inclusive Futures at Griffith University and a member of Planning Institute of Australia, MPIA, and Transport Australian Society. So please welcome Dr. Lisa Stafford. Thank you so much for coming along.
It's a pleasure to be here, Matt. And yeah, and seeing everyone's faces, there's a lot of familiar faces I haven't seen for a while, and but also good to see new faces and to talk about transport, which is something that I think so many of us are passionate about, as I heard in the introduction. So, and I'm also excited. I said to Matt, I've actually have an opportunity to, have a good discussion with people. Been asked to talk about transport. A couple of times in the recent months, and they've given me like a 10-minute sort of window. And there's not really much you can talk. There's a lot to say in 10 minutes, right? But not enough to get to the deep, I think, deep issues that so many of us live and experience, or we're advocating really strongly to see change. So I'm going to try to successfully show my slides. And I've done this because I know some people benefit from visual, and I've also got some text here. Please don't get overwhelmed by text. I'll talk to it. And I'm also happy to share my slides. I just wanted to show all the amazing ideas that have actually come from Tasmania. And I think I worry sometimes we lose that. We get talk about the barriers, but we have generated the solutions. So how do we take those solutions and move them forward is what I'm really passionate to talk about today. So let me just see if I can successfully do this. Oh, I need you to allow me
Ah,
to do that, Matt.
you are allowed.
Oh, I'm allowed now. Great. Permission granted. Just as long as I show the right thing. Let's see if that's okay. Let me know if it actually changes slides. It's nothing worse when you're halfway through and someone goes, are you still on the first slide? All good. I'm all happy for wrong. So yeah, Matt's already introduced where I am. But I do live here in beautiful lutruwita, in southern Tasmania. I was away for a year last year, but I'm back, and loving being back. The we have such some of the most beautiful landscapes in the world. So this slide here is really to reinforce what we've already said. Like transport is a key connector of every aspect in life, really. It connects us to work, it connects us to friends, it connects us to health, it connects us to national parks that Michael just talked about, trails, all these things that so many people take for granted. We heard it's a lifeline for people and communities. In that way, a lifeline for our social, emotional, physical well-being and needs. It enables us to get a job, enables us to go to education, enables us to do a lot of things. We also know globally it's a key determinant of our health. Without it, it can impact us. And we also know it's going to be really important as part of climate impact when we're thinking about what's happening with Mother Earth at the moment. And I'll read this quote because it just always sits with me. Um, that transport makes a complete life possible. These sort of services become almost a lifeline to community. And what I want, hang on, I've just got to move my Zoom panel. It's sitting over the top of the quote. What I want from a service is something that makes the community better and makes the community more livable. I think most of us would resonate that. Um, And the images here I've chosen because they describe the differences in how we move about our streets or our communities, whether, we're a blind person with a guide dog and cane, or in our wheelchair walking our dogs, or catching up and meeting people informally on the streets. Um, with our dogs or animals, whether we're a young child just learning to ride our bike or go for a walk like this young man here, or just places to chill out with like either friends or our grandparents or those multi-generational impacts. So it really does matter. And it saddens me we're still here fighting the fight, particularly for people with disabilities. But as Carol Ann pointed out, it affects older people, it affects younger people. It affects pretty much everyone and anyone who chooses to not drive or can't drive. Um, and so, we're here because unfortunately, so many think people take for granted transport, whether it's, being able to get on a plane. People take for granted you can do that. For many of us, like myself, we have to ask permission from the airlines to even be allowed to go because of a two-wheelchair policy. And that's with all of the permissions already in place. Like we can't just turn up or wing it. There's another colleague of mine who's an amazing, academic in law who's blind. We were having this good conversation the other day, and you can't just turn up to a bus stop and wing it either, just, hope that it's going to turn up. There's so much more that's in place. And that's because one in three of us will have difficulties accessing locations. And that's whether it's mobility, whether that's communication, accessibility, information, entries, those sort of things, whether it's sound, those effects of the environment. And also one in six of us actually have difficulties accessing public transport. And we know that's much worse when you in places like Tasmania, where we have much more limited. Hobart's the worst of all capital cities in terms of accessibility, and Launceston's was the worst performing of all cities in Australia in terms of access to transport in measures. What this means for us in terms of day to day, it really does impact when you think about living on the fringes in our outer suburbs, or when we're in regionals, as it was mentioned earlier around Northwest, which was a focus. And this principle of just being able to go for a walk, there's nothing. I can't even use footpaths or anything just to go for a walk. And this was a mother talking about her 12-year-old daughter that I did a lot of research with earlier on, and with children and young people around just the neighborhoods and the connection between mobility and participation. We know that's really strong. So that's what that was about. Um, and as we know, when you're affected by transport, the concept they use a lot is transport disadvantage. It really means that you don't have access to transport where you live and don't have the means or solutions available to you to do that. As in, like, you can't just, Uber it or get in a car or buy a new car. And by doing so, impacts you further. And we know that impacts education, employment, social interaction, and safety. And what I wanted to point out here is from other research we've done around Australia, and this was specifically with young people with disabilities and their transition between education and getting a job. So other places are also affected, and particularly our regional communities. And we'll see hear similar stories when we look at Tassie shortly. It's, there's no accessibility on weekends, very limited services, unreliable, really difficult. I don't feel safe. So there's all these different consistent factors. And I chose this photo because this is where I used to on the bus getting off. So it's okay pretty much in the day. This is like a similar photo at night. And so this is the other thing that we get in Tassie is there's like light and then there's pitch dark. I can't see, I can't even, so for people myself or low vision, blind people, or anyone who just has other trauma related impacts with darkness, these are real factors that even you might even be able to get off the bus, but how do you get home and feel safe about it? So safety is a big thing that we often forget about it. Do I feel safe? And so I thought that was a classic example to show my own experience there. I could have showed the broken ramp as well. I've had experiences of too. It's sometimes they call it extreme, it's like extreme sports, catching the bus in Tassie. So that moved us on to because we'd done all this work around with young people, and I had a great opportunity with Anglicare Tasmania to do this project called Trips Not Made. And it was a really great opportunity for us to do a bit of a deep dive into what is it really like trying to catch transport in Tasmania as a young person, as a person with a disability, and living in the outer suburbs and regional areas in Tasmania. And so um, and we did Trips Not Made purely because a lot of the conversations about barriers, but what does that mean for us? Like, what is the impact when we aren't able to catch a bus? Like, what are the trips we're not making because of these barriers? And that was a really important framework that I can't take the credit for all that, but myself and Bridget Doran, she's my colleague in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and had been talking about like let's start making the impacts on this and Bridget Leno led the way with this and we did a big project together she led in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and so it was a great opportunity we were able to also start looking at trips not made in Australia and Tassie was the first starting point for that. So what we did is have conversations with people about what are they experiencing barriers around the whole journey? And when we say whole journey, that starts with how do we prepare? Like, so looking up the timetable online to try and find out when your bus is coming. Now, that is really difficult for so many people, given you got to download a PDF and hopefully can interpret what that looks like. It starts from trying to plan your trip all the way to actually trying to get out your front door to get to where actually that transport is going to pick you up from. um, you've also got a lot of waiting to do while you're there, and that's a whole lot of experience as well. And then when you get on the bus, what does that feel like and look like and experience like? Not knowing sometimes when to get off, all those sort of things. And I'll describe that to you, what we've detailed. And then when you get there, can you get to where you're supposed to be? And then another big thing we were hearing is getting stuck getting home because again of the short options that we have for transport here. And so a lot of that, what were the key themes we kept turning? People felt it was untrustworthy. I don't feel like I can depend on the system where I am. It's worrying and risky. Um, costly, costly in terms of money. So some of the regional areas it costs more where you live. That shouldn't be the case, but it is. It's costly in terms of time because it's so long to try and do any connections of your trips. And that's if it all works out and you haven't missed the bus or the bus didn't turn up. Dignity, it's costly in dignity. Some of us have had really horrendous experiences around, um, undignified experiences, um, whether it's waiting, whether that's getting on, or whether that's on the journey, unfortunately. Income, people have lost hours, work hours, and or even choices of courses or finishing courses because of the limitations of that and safety, as I said, not just trips and falls, but also do I feel safe in terms of harassment and bullying and that sort of stuff that can happen. So I should, give a trigger warning that, people do discuss some of that sort of stuff as well. So I'll let you know when we get into that description. So that's why people are saying there's a real fear here that you don't know if the bus is coming, that they get cancelled so often. And then, the choices when I finish my degree, what job am I going to go to? Because I literally can't use travel. These are really significant conversations that impact people on so many levels. And what I've got here is a description. There's a visual recorder. So Kylie Dunn did a lot of the drawing. So when people talked about the themes and shared themes, she captured them by pictures and some summaries. So this is just an example of one of the many descriptions came from the community chat. Go to the next slide. So as I said, don't there's a lot of text here, but it's really to show that so not only did we highlight those tension points I described in the whole of journey, but we also detailed So when we are talking to policymakers and transport providers and all the people things about what that actually looks like. So instead of just saying difficulties planning your trip, what we talked about was it was confusing and poor access to information and technology. Matt will be like just, yep, reinforcing this. And that was because our timetable information is hard to read, use, and follow. And that's from a cognitive accessibility. So there is no easy English. There is, as I said, it's PDF. It's really cumbersome to follow. And then when you look at digital accessibility, again, PDF, right? But on top of that, there was also about, if things are only on websites, you have to have data to, how do you access that website? You have to have access to um, digital data, and you have to have digital technology. And we know some regions, some areas in Tasmania are poorly covered by digital access. Um, Inadequate apps and no real-time information. Tassie still doesn't have great real-time information. I know it's showing up on Google Maps now, but that's if you're savvy. Like other areas, there is an integrated information system where you can actually get real-time information. So my phone tells me the bus is coming in 3 minutes and even shows me on the map, but also can tell me by speaking to me. We don't have that. It's really difficult trying to do multiple route trips. So, and by that is like if I'm coming in from my area, which is in like the Southern Beaches, Dodgers and Dodgers Ferry and stuff like that, we've got to go into town. But then if I need to get into UTAS, where I used to work, I have to then change buses. Like you can't, you got to go into Hobart to then go out. And we heard this from Huonville as well, to all these places. So you've got to go into the city to go out. And that's really complicated. And trying to map that is not really helpful. Missing or out of date timetables came up quite a bit, or missing information at bus stops. That's if you're lucky to have any information. And there's limited access to talk to a person on the phone. Some people just would really like information, customer service, whether that's phone and in person. That's been reduced even further, people felt. So these were really significant. So Matt, you'll have to do timekeeping because I can talk about this forever. Um, so the other thing was also, that was the information and technology component, but there was also what people were saying is that difficulty planning your trip was also because it was really complex making a trip. As I said, you're having to go in to go out, even though you're going past the area that you got to go back to. Um, so the multiple buses and long wait times between, and that was particularly once you get, when you're 2 hours in between buses, that we know are in some places, Orford, or the Tasman Peninsula. I'm just talking southern, but also northwest is similar to this as well that we were hearing, is that there's long wait times. It might be just one bus in, one bus out for the day. I know Burnie's got much more regular service, but some of the other areas are not so much. Um, and then we also had lack of responsiveness to the needs of the first user. It's so pitched at the 9 to 5 commuter, but people have different lives. And I think, this was already mentioned, we go out on weekends, we want to go out at nights. And it was really interesting because they just reported on Tasmania having one of the worst nightlives, or Hobart having one of the worst nightlives, and transport was one of the key factors of that. I mean, I can't get a bus past 6 o'clock. How are other people? Um, and then, yeah. And we heard that all the time, and particularly for young people where casual work is really like one of your key jobs. And that generally is not in during 9 to 5. That's generally at night or on weekends. And so that's where, getting a job, keeping your job, or getting extra work becomes a real problem, which is affordability then. It impacts your income. So that was the difficulties planning your trip. So we spoke a lot. As you can see, there's a lot wrong. Oops. Um, but then there was the difficulties getting to the bus. And these are sort of common themes we already hear about in terms of infrastructure, like footpaths, um, lighting, these sort of really key factors to make you feel safe. And a really big factor that came up for Tasmania was also the seasonal weather conditions, black ice, for example, on surfacing that can make it really unsafe and slippery and stuff like that. So, these for many of us are sort of pretty familiar, the infrastructure component. But also with that, once you did get to the bus stop, well, actually, it's just the pole in the ground for so many people, really. It's not a stop. So, like, as in a formal shelter or an accessible platform. So, the lack of real-time information that we talked about before, and a history of the bus not turning up, um, or missing the bus. So, these really contributed to that nervous wait, just that anticipation um, and feeling unsafe. And that can be because of the darkness, as we talked about, the lights, there's no lighting. I'm standing in the middle of nowhere. I have no Wi-Fi. These because it's just in a, you know, I know or poor digital spaces. Um, Uncomfortable waiting because most don't have shelters, seating. And when we think about our cold, windy, rainy weather, and it's been windy very lately. So when you think about all these factors, these influence whether people feel like they can make that trip. And then, as I said, we've got having to be vigilant on the bus. And these included delays with the online top-up system, which connects back to the digital. Some people reported that there was delays between 24 and 48 hours for top-ups, which meant that they had no money on their card and so had this awkward, undignified sort of issues with credit. There was the negative bus driver interaction sometimes. There was the feeling of crowding. I know crowding, but it does if you've got small amounts of buses going from peak periods of time. There was that. And this is sort of the trigger warning people were raising that they had personal safety issues, whether that was sexual harassment or bullying that people experienced on the bus. And this has, unfortunately been reported. A really key factor that's so simple to address is inconsistent on-board lighting. So there's different variations in policies per bus companies in Tassie, and onboard lighting can be a real factor for sensory neurodivergence and also the safety factor as a woman and stuff like that. So, getting the lighting right is really significant for actually someone feeling like they are able to catch the bus and feel okay about it and not be overloaded and or overwhelmed or scared. Limited security, as we know, buses are different to trains and stuff like that. They don't have onboard security that run up the train or the surveillance and stuff like that. And I mean, not that we all want to be surveillance, but knowing that there's some options. Um, Again, and again, having no information to tell you when to get off. So the lack of visual and auditory prompts to say, hey, the next bus stop is this. And because we don't have the real information with us on our phones and stuff, that adds to that feeling. Last but not least is getting stuck getting home. And that sounds weird, but again, because of the limited services, a lack of real-time information to let us know if those buses are being cancelled, and the unpredictability of service have all led to stories of people getting stuck getting home, which, is really, yeah, really horrible and awful, and particularly when we don't have a huge access to taxis. And in some areas, there is no accessible taxis. So, what does that mean for you? And that leads back to the safety. So, all these tension points across that transport journey was what meant that some people weren't making trips. So, that led to the trips not made, essentially. So I might just pause. Is there any question? Oh, am I allowed to ask questions? Do you want me to ask questions, Matt, or do you want me to wait?
Yeah, very open to ask everyone for questions or any comments.
Yeah, reflections before we go in. And your cat
And
just turned up. Love it.
Kitty's shown up to
Yep.
say her
That's
word.
okay. That's all right. Well, cool. Just wanted to pause and just make sure because there was a lot in there. But I thought it was important to just show the detail that was actually shared and the work that we have actually done here. So as you could see from that, then that meant that trips were not being made for so many different reasons. Education was really huge. As I mentioned, choosing your study. And people forget about this, that it really influences what courses you take. What days you can go, field trips, if there's requirements to be on campus, then that really dictates for your career. And that's significant. Jobs and work, as we talked about, reduced hours, loss of shifts, loss of opportunities, even to do, pracs and stuff like that. It implicates social connections. We saw that seeing friends and family and keeping connected with family and friends. Really big, significant impact. Um, Attending appointments like your health appointments, whether that's doctor's appointments, therapists, getting treatment, a whole range of different factors that really could influence whether you went or not, unfortunately. And also social appointments, and these could be like social services with it's not Centrelink anymore, Service Australia and Service Tasmania. These are really key places that you need to sort of go to appointments. Um, Going out at night on weekends. Yes, people do want to have a life and want to have, friendships, relationships, and just go and have fun and explore, like what Michael was talking about, the trails. So this did come up. Um, Currently, it is nearly impossible to get to your national park by public transport, which is pretty full on here when you think about that. Um, and so then you're pushed into whether you have to go to private charters and stuff like that, which costs more money, right? And so that's where people were describing, this feeling of being unable to do things, or as one of our articles talked about, have mentally cancelled a lot of trips because it's just too hard. When you've got all that going on, you know, is it worth it? Like, do I really need to do it? And these are the quotes here on the side are describing different experiences. So, people talking about being really socially isolated, and this can disengage us. It's certainly right at the top of the list is the most major disadvantage is getting around. It really is difficult to get around. This other young person shared about denying night shifts because they couldn't get back home. I was like, sorry guys, can't work those days because I physically can't do that shift. And it's also about, it's just like public transport is so the public can transport, laughter in brackets, but there's nothing to transport on. You can't do anything. Um, and also what you were saying, all the appointments, medical appointments, the shopping, if you had animals, unless you had someone to take you, you can't go. So this is sort of, contextualizing what happens when we're talking about trips not being made. It's really a significant measure, and I think it's a powerful way in which we can actually help lobby. But in saying that, I want to move us to the next bit, is that people with disabilities, young people, people living in Tasmania are really great also for identifying the solutions. And I think this is something that keeps getting overlooked um, by, a whole range of different stakeholders that are actually, involved in transport, is that some of these things are really easy. Like, as I said, the consistent lighting policy by talking with a range of people with disabilities to ensure that whatever bus you get on has the consistent lighting at night, and that we know that it's actually appropriate for diverse people with disabilities. And this is a conversation, and it can be light bulbs. So these are some of the things we talked about. Also, having an easy read and print to take with you timetable again is something that is not, we're not talking really expensive things here. We're talking about practices that can be put in place. If there's PDF, why can't there be Word? These are things. At least there's like a 12-hour timetable. We don't have 24-hour because that was also really complicated with telling time. But again, how can we actually make sure that what we're creating, which is really key, critical information, is actually accessible, whether it's, as I said, easy English versions, digital accessibility. So, Matt, obviously, you need to get involved. He will get you involved. All that technology and the technology that is readily available already. It's not like they have to create new real-time information systems or create these integrated ticketing systems. They're already there and available. And I know they've been testing it, but we're still waiting, aren't we, for just integrated ticketing? Hopefully soon. Um, so, and these all will actually affect. So I won't, yeah. So we spend a lot of time on user-friendly timetable information and great ideas, even like QR codes on bus stops, all the polls, just so I can even, find the timetable, things like that, that again don't cost much, but actually help people if they can't find the information easily. So, there's a whole range of stuff, but not reliant purely on digital. I loved also the fact that people talked about inclusive features like text to talk. We don't utilize that enough, and it's a really important for timetables, particularly, which are complex to read, an easy way to cut through the problems. But we also can't lose sight. We need to have improved access to our customer service. We still have to people on the phone or in person. It's a really important service for a lot of people. Um, to improve our seamless networks, we really there needs to be a multiple approach. People were really thinking they're like, okay, we can't have all this, every bus stop in front of every house, but there has to be solutions that need to be done with the community because there's a really lot of great community ideas and the fact that start planning for our connections. So if you live in one suburb, it'd be great to go to your next suburb if you need to do that instead of having to go all the way into Hobart and back again. No, but that was a really big thing is we need to have, yes, those beta service, so the demand services, the quick services, but we also need the routes that actually cover a range of people, particularly in our hilly areas where people aren't having to walk, 400 or 800 up to a K on high gradients to actually get to the bus stop. It's not going to happen for people. Um, we need to also look at on-demand and community transport options that are better and community transport as in for all activities, not really restricted and limited, and also having good timetables. And again, all this has to happen with planning with the community around that. And consistency and price came up quite a bit. Just because you're on a different service provider doesn't, you shouldn't mean that you'll have a different rate of pay. So what's deemed regional is really varied. The consistency, which leads us into affordable and just fares. This was really significant, and it's not something that's unique just to Tasmania. The Productivity Commissioner of Australia came up with that we need to ensure our low income working people can access fair concessions. So you might be working, but you might be, some people is referred to as working poor. Like you have a job, but you're in low income. Um, but that may mean that you're not actually available to concessions. So we need to ensure that there's ways in which to support people. Whether you do what Brisbane, like Southeast Queensland adopted the 50-cent fare, those sort of systems. There's a lot of controversy over that, but I was up in Brizzy not long ago, and I'm originally a Queensland girl from Meangie in Brisbane, but yeah, there was so much use of transport. I've never seen transport so busy, and it's because it's 50 cents. So people can decide rather than where I used to convert, like travel from, and it was like $30 return for the day. Like, so 50 cents versus $30. It's food on the table we're talking, and that's what we heard, shouldn't have to make decisions whether you buy the loaf of bread or be able to, catch the bus to go to school. These are really significant factors. So there's ways and means we can do that and make sure the fair pricing for our outer suburb areas particularly are really impacted. And maximize the ceiling. I know there's been this weird $10, but $10 is still, it is still significant. So we need to have a rethink about what just fares really look like. Because transport is a service. You're never going to make money out of it should never. Like we don't ask to make money out of hospital systems. It's a basic service that should be delivered for the cost it's required. So I just always think of that argument. The other solutions came up as people thought that the easy read the buses. So we need to look at the sealed services and infrastructure. So there needs to be investment in our infrastructure. We're not accessible. We're not compliant. We're supposed to be 100% compliant of all our bus shelters back in 2022. I don't know about people here, but I don't think we're anywhere near that. Yeah, yeah. Matt's laughing. So how do we put the emphasis on that and how it really affects things? This is probably the harder one because the bus stops are infrastructure. It's really big costs. But it actually makes people be able to use it. Like, and everyone benefits from using it. Everyone benefits from not being overwhelmed by the wind and the rain and the cold, and just having lighting to feel safe. So these are really basic fundamentals that everyone will benefit from. Um, so that's one of the things around our footpath infrastructure and also our shelters. Um, but again, as we said, those easy things like at the beginning, the having QR code timetables, emergency mobile signals, particularly in areas where there is no, um, sorry, the fire alarm's just going off. It's okay. It's all good. I can hear my husband. He'll get it. Can you hear that? Do you want me to mute?
No, no, we can't hear it at all,
Oh,
actually.
my noise cancelling might be working really well. Um, if I have to go, I'll let you know. Um, so this came up really importantly for areas that didn't have or had really poor digital, and how do you actually um feel safe or be able to look up information and stuff. Obviously, that's a really complicated stuff, but in its broader, it connects to the broader digital accessibility issues in Tasmania. So, but being part of those conversations are really important. So that's sort of all the bus stuff. So that's a bit bigger issues, but the I think the argument's there and one we can continue to argue for when we're talking to the service providers. But importantly, our government departments, between our local government and also our oh, good, it's gone off. Um, Sorry, just my mind is
Yeah.
so but importantly, between our state government and our local governments, we really need to keep this resolved on how to, invest in this area because it's an ongoing area of complexity. And that was one of the actual recommendations is that we actually get a resolve on that policy wise. A stress-free bus journey. And this is about, obviously there's the accessible buses themselves with kneeling auto ramps, audio visual bus stop announcements, lighting for safety. That is not actually overwhelming for neurodiversity, like it's good lighting. These are sort of things that our buses could have. And I did ride the metro in Brisbane. I have to say I'm in love with it. It's an auto ramps, kneeling, audio, visual announcements, press a button and the ramps come out. I was like, can I bring it back with me? Apparently it doesn't fit on our roads, but it's okay. But there is the technology advancing that actually makes this for so much. Again, the customer service immediate feedback information. Some people said, wouldn't it be great if we actually had QR codes or something where we could actually just make a response or a complaint or feedback straight away, that instant feedback. We need improved security, and I know there's been a lot of work done to improve the safety for bus drivers, and we need to look at how do we ensure that that's also for um, passengers. Limiting the crowding is really important too. Like I know that seems weird again, crowding, but it does, and that's because we need to have more buses. So if you got the last bus at 6 o'clock, it's going to be busy because it's the only one you can get home. Otherwise, you're stuck getting home, or you have to pay $150 taxi fare. Um, so that's if you can get the taxi. So, how do we actually make sure that we've got better services, consistent services that are actually about meeting diverse users' needs? As I said, I've already spoken about the policy, real simple thing to do. Um, on the go trip planning that we know that's already been used by other states and it has been planned for here, but how do we make sure it's going to happen? Bike and mobility aid storage. Wouldn't it be great that we had them on our buses? And this is like whether you're scooters, some people do use bikes for fatigue and mobility and then can get on the bus. In Canberra, example of this is they have like a bus rack at the front of the buses, quite quirky. Yeah, so these are again things that are not, pie in the sky. They're already implemented elsewhere. So how do we do that? Particularly because of the distances people have to travel. Getting much more driver disability diversity education. That was really strongly across the board and diverse disability, and that education being developed and generated by people with disabilities. And I know there has been work done on it, but how do we make sure it's implemented and consistent? And it's not just a one-off either. Like this is the thing that we see so much is that we have these education sessions and people just go to it for an hour or it's online these days most of the time and then nothing, like it's that ongoing conversations we need. How do we build in that monitoring process? And I know, um, oh gosh, I should Kinetic. Kinetic is the my bus service up here. Kinetic's brought in for Tasmania a working group because obviously they have a lot of the buses and the Sky buses also through Kinetic and stuff. So they've brought in a working group for accessibility now. So how do we make sure that we have that everywhere? And that they're all talking to each other. That would be even better. All our different service provider, whether you're Metro, whether you're Kinetic, whether you're Tassie Link, and I think it's Conroe's on the northeast. Um, Conroe's, I think. Anyway, so how do
Lisa,
yeah.
Lisa, it's Doug. Can you say a little bit more about the Kinetic Accessibility Group? What's going on there? Because obviously they do Launceston, Hobart, Devonport as well, Redline coaches.
Yep, they do all of them. And Skylink. So they formed up a working group this year. We've only had one. I got my name onto it.
Yep,
There's about four different representatives of five across Tassie of people with disabilities,
yep,
um, and from the different regions as well. So I think they've established them in other states, and so ourselves and there was another one. I think it might have been Queensland. They sort of yeah started them this year. So it was a watch and see. Happy to keep coming back to this group you know, um, and communicating and that and being and as I said to Matt and Rosie, I'm happy to actually attend each month, each time because I'm so passionate about what we're talking about here.
Thanks,
But
Lisa.
yeah, I'm hopeful, Doug.
Yep,
The general manager for Kinetic for whole of Australia sits on it.
yes.
Um, and they seemed open, but I did push around the bus stops. Obviously it's not their responsibility, but I said, but we need you to help us advocate, so um yeah.
I caught the, sorry, it's Doug again. I caught the bus from Launceston to Hobart the other day for Red Line, which is now Kinetic. There was a security guard on there. Never seen that in Tasmania before.
Really?
Who sat at the back with his high vis jacket on, checking out that everybody was behaving themselves. So that's the first time I've
Oh.
seen that on Tasmanian transport.
Yeah, okay, that's great. Yeah, they
Mm.
definitely seem interested, like,
Yeah.
so
And
mm,
and most importantly, they've actually set up a proper transit centre in Launceston instead of a footpath. It was very sad 15 years ago when the wonderful transit centre in Hobart, um, it stopped and it became just a shop front where people pile out onto the footpath, which is really quite inappropriate. So it sounds like Connecticut trying to make a bit of a difference. So yes, please, Lisa, if you can keep this group informed on that, that would be great. Thanks,
yeah,
Lisa.
I think we've got one in a couple of weeks' time. I can't remember when it went in my diary, but it's either October or early November. So yeah, definitely happy to even like email the group. But also email me if you want me to advocate for anything for Kinetic too, because obviously I'm only on one route, and I know that everyone has different experiences. And even if you use the Sky Bus, I don't. But if you use a Sky Bus for airports, because all of these things matter. So yeah, I'm really happy for you to email me um,
Thank
anything you want me to advocate for. But yeah, I'm hopeful, Doug.
you.
You know me, I'm always hopeful.
All good.
The greater question. And so that leads us to the stress-free bus ride home. It would be really good that we can come up with definitely service times and mode options. And people aren't asking for like running big bus services and stuff like that, but asking for different ways of thinking about transport. How do we utilize even our resources that are in communities, whether it's our community transport vehicles or something like that, better at nights and on weekends that will service our communities because um, we have to do something. It's it's like a no action is not an option anymore, so to speak, and it never has been. But also importantly, we've got to actually plan with the people and communities. And I know we advocate for this all the time, but when you know how transport planning doesn't often think about within communities, particularly like it might be connecting regions and regions, but how do communities move about and what do they do? I mean, that's a really important part that we can help answer. So that's on the journey of the solution. So as you can see, there is so much things we can be doing, and there are some really cheap things that we could be doing. What we also did is identify, some of the key things, and I've already talked about this. Like obviously, we need to build trust back into the transport. That's really key. And the way we can do that is by planning with people and communities to try and come up with some solutions. And that, as I said, even showing like what Doug just showed, Kinetic putting a security bus on the bus. Like these are just small actions that could actually help people feel a bit more safe. Bring an equity focus into transport planning. And I'm going to talk briefly about this just because I'm going to plug my next project because it's just about to start in about 3 weeks' time, where we're actually talking about equity because it's something that is really important globally. Transport equity is a key sustainable development goal, but how we actually do it, as in like ensuring that people have what they need and the most disadvantaged have what they need in order to access public transport. So that's a bit of a difference from just access. We're actually thinking before that and actually making sure we're planning through that. A good example of that is um, there's been a whole lot of schemes recently about, buying bikes. Um, but buying bikes, those schemes require you to buy them and then you get reimbursed. And that requires you to have money in order to do that. So we know that probably the most disadvantaged wouldn't necessarily have the 3 grand or 4 grand to buy their electronic e-bike and be reimbursed. So what we don't see is the uptake in that area. And if you actually brought an equity lens to it, you'd make sure that those planning schemes actually had ways in which we could actually ensure that people who have a genuine need around that bike, the e-bike, that would make a big difference to them, that they actually can have access to that without having to have the money up front to then be reimbursed. So it's just reframing the conversation. And that's really different to bringing that into a transport planning framework. Um, we've also got to change the story and culture about public transport. I don't know about many of you, but like the stories I hear, all the groans or, oh, who catches those buses? I grew up with transport. My mum didn't drive. We rode the bikes. We walked. We had an access to, I had an access to bus, and we also had a train 15 minutes. So and the bus was our freedom wheels, like you knew if you're going to get grounded, the bike was going to get taken from you. So, you know, so, for some of us, we had that culture, but, of recently, there's a lot of negativity around it. So how do we be a part of changing that story and conversation? Matt, did you put your hand up?
Yeah, it's really interesting talking about the story and especially the culture of it all. When we were looking to move to Tassie 6 years ago, I was looking online about, what should I, know about in moving to Tassie,
Mm,
and everyone said, don't come here if you can't drive or you can't
mm,
afford a car. Do not
mm,
come here because there's no public transport or the public transport isn't good enough.
mm.
So I think about that from tourism and
Oh,
people coming into Tassie, that's a limiting
mm,
factor for a lot of people. But in regards to culture, I feel like, a lack of public transport, when it's been so prevalent for so long, it can be self-perpetuating,
yeah.
where people get this idea of having sort of a car ownership culture.
Mm,
So people think that public transport is less valuable because people have the unreasonable expectation that everyone can just drive their car.
yeah.
Um, have you seen that in the community? And if so, how do we sort of combat this?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so there's I think there's a class social stuff that
Hmm.
I've seen and witnessed, like in terms of when people talk about, oh, who uses public transport. There's also, as you said, we've had a car culture for so long, and particularly in area like in here, um, where it's really hard to do behavior change at the best of times, like to get people to switch modes. But when you have the system we've just described, yeah, unless you lose your car or, or forced into it, it's a really difficult thing for many of us. And it's many of us don't have that choice here on the conversation, but it's really interesting, yeah. And I think there needs to be some wins on the board before we're going to actually build the trust back in the system, particularly for people with disabilities, and actually change people's attitudes or societal. It's really a societal level issue around that culture of transport here. It's almost like it's so bad we just can't do it. It's like so broken we can't fix it. Um, and I feel that's I don't know because you can't make assumptions, but I just feel sometimes that's also the broader feeling as well, policy wise. Yeah. Alexa?
Yeah, I don't know if this is relevant at all, but I have a 15-year-old daughter and she is an absolute wizard with the buses here in Hobart.
Mm.
And I think a big part of getting that kind of social uptake in using public transport is getting the young people involved as well. And a lot of them are catching buses to school out of necessity, and a lot of kids with disabilities are precluded from that for the reasons that we've been discussing. um so I don't know what the solution is there, but I'm personally really interested in engaging with the young folks of Tasmania and figuring out how they can assist in making things more accessible as well, because I think that there is a genuine want and desire there for that. And yeah, Eve loves catching the buses, but also hates it at the same time for all the reasons that we discussed. So it's an issue for everybody, irrespective of disability as well.
Absolutely, Alexis. And we heard that from the young people. Like,
Yeah.
people are really worried about climate change, especially young people, and they're being forced into car ownership. And one young person, I didn't have the quote up here today, but pretty much said you're screwed if you don't use a car. I don't want a car, but you're screwed if you don't have a car here. Like, so we're forcing people into those, where moral and ethical questions that
Yeah,
young people are having into um not just forced car ownership, but then there's also the poverty that goes with, like there's insurance, there's a cost to run it. Like there's so much stuff which then can force them into transport poverty because you can't actually afford it.
exactly. And too many cars is a genuine issue too. Like I live in, the suburban scape of Howrah, in the new building area, and the cars are just lining the streets. There's too many cars. There's like 4 cars per household on average or something. Probably not that many, but it's ridiculous. Like, why do we need this many cars? So it's a
Yeah.
problem.
Oh, look, and it's not unique to Tassie. This is a conversations that are having broadly. I actually had an extra slide, but I cut it out because I thought, no, it's too much. But that was a data from the up in Southeast Queensland in one of my earlier projects with young people, children and young people, and the developments, they're getting smaller and smaller. There's more cars per household. They're filling into the streets, and when you don't have footpaths, you're forcing people to walk on the streets, which essentially is taking over where cars are, and then you're forced into movement car zones. And so they wonder why people are like, and that project was called, bounded to the driveway, because that was the restrictions that were coming because of then car speeding, no poor visibility because it was just crowded. And it is a growing factor, and I think it's why why there's been such a push planning wise is that we need to think about how do we, fix what's around, whether we're doing infill development that's been done, we're bringing transport, we're trying to connect using more active transport like pathways and shared ways to sort of try to, assist with that. There's so many ways we can be doing, but again, it's about leadership. And I think that's where we're really missing is strong leadership around active and public transport, even though it's critical to our survival, if you want to think about the broader climate change impacts. But, we need to have leadership. And I think that's where I know we've been advocating for a long time, but how do we harness our energies to sort of drive, call them out on it and keep driving for those changes. We are seeing little bits and bobs. There's little examples here and there of shared pathways and stuff going on, but yeah, there needs to be a lot more, which we won't mention the other big infrastructure thing here. I could be spending a lot more for that much money that could improve people's lives and actually livelihoods and actually probably save lives when we think about, how important transport really is. So they're really important questions. There's we talked at Tascos recently, myself and Cherie from well, actually it's broader. It's the Cradle Coast Authority. They've been doing some really awesome advocacy work around transport for so long. And Veronica, Terry, and me have been sort of, talking and advocating and all this behind the scenes for a while. And one of the things we talked about at Tascos was that we need a consortium. We can't just keep doing our little pockets or, oh, let's just do another little project and not recognize all the work that's happened. So Alexis, Why Not has done a fantastic project. I'm happy to share it with you. They did a Why Not.
Please.
Yeah, the Tasmanian Forum, they've published it, and it's a fantastic document that talks about the young voices of Tasmania and their solutions to transport. And that was done, I think, in 2022 because I was facilitators of the group. I was lucky to have a fortunate to be a part of that. Do it, like not obviously do it, but I was witnessed in the room and really powerful stuff. So there's so much work that's been done. Mission Australia does work. Our project, earlier stuff by Tascos. So there's knowledge bank here. We don't need more barrier research or we don't need like private consultants picking, what we need is then to move it forward, like taking these solutions and then putting them into implementation. And so what Carrie and Veronica and myself, and we're going to actually send some information around a call for people to actually help be part of that. And that's the big organizations, but importantly, us that are passionate about transport. So these are other ways in which we can start trying to change that. But understanding, that culture change is one of them and behavior change is one of the most hardest things to do. But yeah, but we have a responsibility. I do. I feel like I do. And why I love talking about transport. So that sort of is where we landed with the project. But as I said, equity is a really significant problem. So this is, can I have 5 more minutes just briefly?
Absolutely. Yep.
Yes. Yes. So transport equity is my newest project, but it builds off this work. It builds off the aritorial work, the transport, and all the research work they've done on transport today with children, young people across Australia. And one of the biggest things, as I mentioned, is equity. We're throwing around this word called transport equity. It's a sustainable development goal. It's 11.2, and people with disabilities are a specific target of it. And it actually has a measure. Not that it makes much sense. It's more like percentage of people with disabilities who have access to public transport, which doesn't tell us a lot of things, right? Because we just saw all the whole journey issues. But it is a really key factor. As I said, it really changes the conversations um, from just doing schemes to improve access to actually thinking about who is it that actually needs to actually have those supports and structures around them to lift them up to, what we would call equity. It's about fairness, ensuring the diverse needs of people have what they need to access and participate. So it's really a different framework where equality without thinking about diversity or adjusting, can lead us into this first image, which is a person walking across across the road, which is no problem, but not for the person in the wheelchair or the person's blind, because they might or sensory impairment, like they might it's a bit of a challenge if you've got no information, whereas the image below is sort of showing it's got the lights, it's got the audio speaking to you, it's got the curb ramps, and a whole range of different people can safely sort of get across. We also have another image called justice, and that's taking it to the next level. But I didn't want to overwhelm at the moment. But it's really about changing those conversations. Equality and equity often get used interchangeably as well, but they are quite different when you think about what the two are trying to do. So the problem we have in Australia is that we have no agreed definition of transport equity, and that's just not specific to Australia. That's actually worldwide at the moment. we don't have the knowledge, or we have knowledge and practice gaps and challenges about how we actually apply equity in transport planning for people with disabilities and chronic illness. Transport planners aren't, trained or built, and we don't have the tools and resources to actually integrate that in decision making when they're doing their transport planning, either investment assessments or planning the transport. And we're yet to understand how best to utilize equity to overcome transport discrimination experienced by people with disabilities. So these are these three big things that we got at the moment. Yes, it's a great goal, but how do we achieve that goal if we've got all this other problems going on? And so that's what my new project is, Transport Equity for All. That's what we're trying to do. So we have really two big aims. Is first is building the understanding of what we mean by transport equity in Australia from diverse people with disabilities and transport planners. So we need to bring both along. Transport planners are important because they're the ones doing the work, and we need to actually build their capacity and knowledge, but we also have to learn from their practice knowledge as well, because it's really key. And at the same time, we need to learn from the expert knowledge of diverse people with disabilities in actually understanding what equity means for them. So the whole idea from this first stage is to develop an Australian disability inclusive transport equity model. Big goal, but I've got 4 years to do the project. Left. It was 5 years now, 4. So it's taken that long to build it all up. But essentially that's the first sort of year and a half. The second component then builds capacity in Australia on actually disability inclusive transport equity. So how do we actually apply that? And how do we build, confident capacity building in our planners? And so the key outputs of that is through co-creating impact measures of transport equity in Australia, and we'll be including in that the transport the trips not made is on the op side of that. And we want to be co-creating a fit for purpose practice framework. So it's got to be actually be able to be used in practice by transport planners. It's really key what we come up with. Otherwise, it just will be like another document. And resources. So when we're talking about resources, these are educational resources that people can continue to learn from. So it's not just the one-off shelf thing that we talked about, that we're engaging in resources that will build knowledge, but also continues that professional development, which is really key in applying equity and planning. And so the first component is like, not traditional research. We have a big strategic advisory group and heaps of targeted processes. But the second component of the project where we're building those measures and stuff is really based on community as a practice. We're going to have, and when we're talking about community practice, there'll be community practice with transport planners and people with disabilities working together. So it's going to be a really awesome, big piece of bodies of work, but we'll be looking for co-creation teams to help with those areas down the track. And of course, we will pay people for their time. So the first component, as I said, is more the traditional research in the sense where people can get involved in different ways, whether it's filling in the storyboard, that we have an easy read storyboard, 6-question, an anonymous figure survey, one-on-one chats with me if you want to have a chat, and then we'll be looking at targeted group chats as well down the track, probably early next year, I would say now, maybe December. But essentially, that's what our project's about. That's what I'm doing. And as I said, the project starts on the 4th of November. So watch your emails and social media. We've also got the Transport Equity Hub is live now, the web page, but the Get Involved section for the young people with disabilities and the Easy Read will be live on the 4th of November. So really keen to have as many diverse voices as possible, because that's how we can build that knowledge bank. It's going to be critical. So yeah, so feel free to email me. You've got my email, or yeah, just look out. So that's my little plug. I think that's it. Yeah, so I'll stop sharing now, but I'll just leave that up in case people are writing it down. But yeah, I'm so thankful to have this chat with everyone. I feel like I've just talked though. I'm sorry.
No, not at all. Thank you so much, Lisa. You were absolutely just full of legendary knowledge and advocacy. So thank you so much for your hard work in this area. It's incredibly important, and I feel like I learned a lot and absolutely loved the discussion we had today. And yeah, please do send me through and plug as much as you want with your links or other things that you're working on. I'll be happy to share them with the community through emails as well. So yeah, opening it up to any other comments or questions before we wrap up.